Good morning, friends. It's so good to see you. So good to be with you. So good to have Jackson leading singing again. It's good to have him and Emily back in town. And I'm glad they miss us because we miss you all. And it's good to have a good number back who've been away. We have a good number still out and out this weekend especially. But you're here, and I'm honored to see you. I do encourage you to come back this evening. We haven't done one of these in a while, but this evening I'd like for us to do a Sunday evening Bible study. And it's a really good thought tonight, I think, that we can look at together as a group. And so I encourage you to come back. I tell you, I'm looking forward to our gospel meeting next month, I believe it is, with Brother Chris Emerson. It's going to be a good one. I texted him this week, in fact, and let him know that. Looking very much to have him with us and his good teaching and the energy and things like that. And he says, yeah, good things are on the horizon here. But I didn't have the heart to tell him because, the other night, Tuesday night, I don't know if you went, but Brother Grant Calvert preached in Christian Home in Butler County Tuesday night. It was a packed house. I mean, it was jam-packed. They had to bring in chairs, and that little building was full. And it was he did a really good job. I hope he shares that lesson with us sometime. But I was driving home, thought, okay, well, there's how we need to advertise this next meeting. Gospel meeting with Chris Emerson featuring Grant Calvert. Because he can bring them in. It was really good. Now, he did really good. And there was a number of us that were able to go and support him and appreciate him very much. So yeah, in Hosea chapter 1, we see in this book that God is using the prophet Hosea to vividly illustrate what's happening in his relationship, God's relationship with his people at this time. They're divided into two different kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. And the northern kingdom had not one godly king. There were some who did a lot of good, but they were not godly. They were worshiping in ways that violated God's will because of the first king they had in the split kingdom, which was Jeroboam. And he invented all these different ways of worshiping, and the nation continued down that path for decades. And then they threw in idolatry on top of that. It was just horrific spiritually what was happening to the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom had a lot of good kings, godly kings, but they would have some evil ones. But then they too also would bring in idolatry among them because of the influence of the land. And so eventually the northern kingdom was taken into Assyrian captivity, and then about 100 years later, the southern kingdom of Judah was taken into Babylonian captivity, all stemming from their departure from God. Well, Hosea was sent, it says, primarily to the northern kingdom. He had a message for the southern kingdom as well, but he was sent to these people right before they were taken into captivity. And he is told, Hosea the prophet was, to marry this woman who is not going to be faithful to him. It says that all this happened in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So this is Jeroboam the second, when all this happened. But it says the word in verse 2, when the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son, and the Lord said to him, so on and so forth, in pronouncing judgment through the kids' names. But you see the image. All right, so the prophet had to go and actually marry this woman who was not going to be faithful to him. And God, of course, is doing this to illustrate what Israel was doing to God. That they were a nation only by the mercy of God, but they were not faithful to him. In chapter 3 and verse 1, it says, "The Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover and is committing adultery, just like the love of the Lord for the children of Israel who look to other gods and love the raisin cakes of the pagans. So he's drawing that parallel. You marry Gomer, she's going to cheat on you. She's not going to be faithful. Well, Israel's my spouse, and they don't love me. I love them, but they don't love me. They're not faithful to me. Show them this, is what God told the prophet Hosea. Now, they didn't listen, but they at least received the message through the prophet. And what we see in this is this great message of healing a broken marriage. And you can see that God obviously is talking about his relationship with his people, but there are some similarities we can apply even in our own marriage. Just like Paul in Ephesians chapter 5, he talks about how a husband is to love his wife and a wife is to respect her husband. And he points out those principles. And he says it's a great mystery, but I'm speaking concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each of you love your spouse, is what he taught in Ephesians 5. Well, the same thing's happening here in Hosea. God was mainly using the prophet to show the people they had cheated on him and were not faithful to him, but that illustration can help us in our own marriage, but then, of course, being mindful of our own relationship to God. And one of the great messages of this book is adultery hurts. That's what he's trying to show through this prophet. And the pain he had in having a wife that would not remain faithful to him, God is saying, that hurts. It hurts me. And that's true. You look in Hosea chapter 2, notice in verses 1 and 2, and then a few other passages. It says in verse 1, Hosea chapter 2, say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy is shown. Bring charges against your mother. Bring charges, for she is not my wife, nor am I her husband. Let her put away her harlotries from her sight, and her adulteries from between her breasts. In verse 5, for their mother has played the harlot. She who conceived them has behaved shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool, my linen, my oil, and my drink. In verse 13, I will punish her. For the days of the Baals to which she burned incense, she decked herself with earrings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but me she forgot. Now we can see, obviously, God is describing what's happening with Israel. That they were not going to be faithful to God. And they weren't. They weren't faithful to him. And the parallel we can see would be true of a spouse who would not be faithful to their mate. But the pain involved, that's what you see just leaping off the pages when you read this prophet, is how much it hurts. How much God was hurting by his people's unfaithfulness, how much we hurt when we have a spouse who will not be faithful. Adultery hurts. There's just no way around it. It hurts. And the reason it hurts is because it's just so selfish. You're only thinking of yourself, and you are betraying somebody who trusts you, who is depending on you. That's why it hurts, among other things. But it just deals with just a very selfish spirit. Now, you flip it over, and we can see in our own marriage, we need to hear this. In our own marriages, we need to, or preparing for marriage even, we need to hear the message of faithfulness, because adultery does hurt. Now, the whole world just happened to be reminded this past week of what happened. And I'm confident that most of you have heard this story or have looked into it. It's all over the world, and it's just so bizarre. It's just so sad that it happened. Of course, they're at this concert in Boston. 65,000 people are there, and they're panning the audience, and they pan on this couple in the upper deck, and we see that this couple was immediately ashamed. I mean, the man hit the deck, she turned around, they were just so embarrassed. And even the lead singer's like, well, either they're having an affair or they're very shy, and people were laughing. Well, we see that they were both married to other people. And so they were caught doing something they shouldn't do, And immediately, that's what's so amazing is immediately when it was exposed, there was immediate shame, immediate guilt. You couldn't hide it. And what's even more disturbing about this is it's global. I mean, this story has just spun around the world, and I know you've heard it. It's tremendous to me. You look at all the different places, like The Guardian, or even this Ryanair. Never heard of that, but it's apparently a foreign airline, and they're even making a play on what happened. Then you have the New York Post, major story there, just seen around the world. I thought this was interesting that story, one of the stories in the New York Post. They're wanting comments, but you can see at the bottom they filed it under these code words to try and find this story: affairs or cheating, or that concert, or infidelity, or marriage. Interesting. To try and research this story, you type in those keywords to pull this story up: affair, cheating, infidelity, so on and so forth. Well, there's nothing honorable about that. And like I said, this thing is just, I mean, it's in the books. It is all over the world. I couldn't believe this, that even in India, the Times of India, the Times of India, like the New York Times, I guess, they had a major story on this as well, talking about the people involved. So sad. And it just reminded me when I saw the story the other night, it reminded me what it says in Proverbs 10, that he who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will become known. You cannot. You cannot live a life of sin. We cannot. And it not come out. It's going to come out eventually. So obviously we need to have integrity. We need to be people who do the right thing. But going back to this message of adultery, it hurts. That's what God is trying to get these people to see. It hurt him. And it hurts your spouse if you were to do this to them. Why? Because it's just so foolish. And it's so harmful. Notice in Proverbs chapter 6, where God is trying to get us to see, don't do this. Don't go down this path. Why? Because it's going to hurt you and hurt people you love. In Proverbs chapter 6, and people who love you. But in Proverbs chapter 6, notice where it says in verses 32 and 33, whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor he will get, and his reproach will not be wiped away. I mean, how true that is. This guy, this couple, unfortunately, is going to go down. They're going to be known for this for many years. It's sad. And they're paying a great price. I think he was a CEO of a $15 billion company, something like that. Seems like one of the stories I read said that. Well, he's already resigned. He's lost that job. He'll never get a job like that again over a company like that. That's gone. No telling what's going to happen to their families involved. It's a real shame. That's why God says in verse 26, by means of a harlot, I know this particular story didn't have a harlot, but it's still the same principle. A man is reduced to a crust of bread, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. Avoid adultery. That's what God said. Avoid it. It's going to reduce you to a crust of bread. And what he means by that is all your things of earthly value will be diminished. You'll lose so much. When you lose your name, you've lost a lot in life. You've lost something that's more valuable than money when you lose your good name. Can we be forgiven? Yes. But do we have to face many painful consequences for some of our choices? Yes. So God says, don't go down that road. Don't be reduced to a crust of bread. And that's this story illustrates that. It's just amazing the stuff that's taken off on talking about this story, and so much of it is false, but it's out there. And you think about that call, or him having to respond to this, or the person he was cheating with having to respond to this. And then I thought, well, what would it be like for us? Or even like a preacher. Because if I did this, obviously I would lose this job, and I deserve to lose this job, and I wouldn't want this job if I was guilty of something like that. But I thought, can you imagine what that phone call would be like? Having to tell people that I'm no longer preaching after 30, almost, 34 years. No longer preaching, can't preach anymore. Why? Because I committed adultery. Does that not sound painful? I mean, like the phone call to my mom. Mom, I lost my job. Why? What happened? I committed adultery. Is there anything good from that? Does that not sound painful? That's what God is saying. Don't do this. Think about the consequences. Think about what's going to happen. Again, can you be forgiven? Absolutely. But does this sin bring pain? Without question. And the reason it's so painful is because it's not necessary. He says in chapter 6 that, when a person's hungry and they go out and steal to try and satisfy that hunger, we can somewhat have compassion on them because they're trying to survive. But when a person has these desires and they steal somebody else's spouse, there is no sympathy for them because while you do have to eat, you do not have to engage in sexual activity. That's a choice. And so he's drawn this parallel in the end of chapter 6 of Proverbs. He says in verse 30, people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he's starving. Yet, when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor he will get, and his reproach will not be wiped away. For jealousy is a husband's fury, therefore he will not spare. In the day of vengeance, he will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased, though you give many gifts. And so God's saying, look, there's just a lot of pain associated with this, and you don't want it. But then, of course, he's trying to get his people to see, that's how I feel when you don't love me like you should. Now, another good lesson from Hosea is how God wants us to be committed. That our relationship with God is based on faithfulness. Just like in marriage, we have to be faithful to one another, or even as a church, we have to be faithful to one another to help each other get through life. Anybody who sits back and says, you do all the serving, you be the faithful person, I don't have to be faithful, it's not going to work. And it wasn't working in God's relationship with his people at this time. In Hosea chapter 6, notice where it says, in verses 4 through 10 of Hosea chapter 6, God wanted a faithful nation. He wanted a faithful spouse. And he wasn't getting it. Now he's going to refer to them, this is the northern kingdom, as Ephraim. Of course, that was a term to describe the northern kingdom. Ephraim, and then he mentions Gilead, which was a principal city in the northern kingdom. But here's what he says in verse 4. O Ephraim, what shall I do to you? O Judah, what shall I do to you? For your faithfulness is like a morning cloud, and like the early dew it goes away. Therefore I have hewn them by the prophets, I have slain them by the words of my mouth, and your judgments are like light that goes forth. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. But like men, they transgressed the covenant. There they dealt treacherously with me. Gilead is a city of evildoers, and defiled with blood, as bands of robbers lie in wait for a man. So the company of priests murder on the way to Shechem. Surely they commit lewdness. I have seen a horrible thing in the house of Israel. There is the harlotry of Ephraim. Israel is defiled. So you can see how he's applying that, obviously, to their spiritual condition as a nation. They weren't committed to him. And if we're going to grow in our marriage, we have to be committed. We have to be devoted and dedicated. Now, one of my favorite examples, and I've got some good ones in here I can use sometime, but one of my favorites is Stephanie's grandparents. Both passed away now, but they were married 72 years. That's a long time. married 72 years. Steph and I will be celebrating our 34th this year. And uh, yeah, 34. But I mean, good lands. 72. I mean, we're not even halfway there yet. That's tremendous to think about. Special, special people. Dedicated Christians. Wonderful people. But I remember him telling me that that's what he said. Because I was just blown away by that. But he says, growing old with your spouse is one of life's finest blessings. Is what he said. And that's true. What a gift it is to be able to grow old with somebody. That's a true gift, a true blessing in life. But you don't get that without being committed. And you know that. Because marriage is hard. It's hard. Marriage is difficult. Life is difficult. But it takes commitment. It takes dedication. And that's what we have to remember in a story like Hosea, is that we have to be people who serve our spouse. We cannot forget that. That marriage is about serving our spouse, about helping our spouse, helping our family, doing for them is what God teaches us. Now you go back to Ephesians 5. Again, in Ephesians 5, God's doing the very same thing through Paul in this text as he did through Hosea. He compares the actual marriage relationship to what's happening in his relationship with his people spiritually, but he still hammers principles in marriage that must be applied. And he says in Ephesians 5:24 and 25, it says, therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. So that's what he's describing, this partnership of spouses serving one another, giving to one another. He ends it that way. In verse 33, well, let me read verse 32. I kept telling you that. It says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Okay, so he's saying, look, these are important rules, but I'm really talking about my spiritual relationship with you as my people. But, he says, nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So, he is teaching the importance of not just showing this to God, but showing it to our spouse. This respect and honor and love and commitment. Very important rule to follow. I think the Bible teaches us we have to be content. And really, is that not where a lot of the trouble comes from? When people are not content with one another, not content with that relationship, and not determined to make it work, looking for ways out. You know what I'm talking about. That's just going to invite trouble. The Bible teaches, and I believe this is something we should pray about always. I believe a noble prayer is, especially nowadays, is that God will help us remain sexually pure. And that God will help us love our spouse, be dedicated to our spouse, faithful to our spouse, just as we are to Him, and that we will be content with our spouse. That is just so important. In Proverbs chapter 5, he's teaching, just be satisfied with your spouse. In Proverbs chapter 5, notice where it says, in verse 15 through 20, drink water from your own cistern, and running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be only your own and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of your youth, as a loving deer and a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you at all times, and always be enraptured with her love. For why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman and be embraced in the arms of a seductress? Now, I understand he's telling young people especially, when you go out on your own and you enter this world, you've got to take this path of righteousness, and you've got to avoid the path of sexual morality. He gets into that through Proverbs. But is this not a good rule? Is it not a good rule? Help me be content. Help me be satisfied. Help me be faithful and loyal to my spouse. Help me to avoid situations that are going to be a temptation or a problem for me. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. God is teaching us, yeah, He's given you the desire of the sexual desire. He's given that to you. But you and I have the responsibility and the obligation to control it, is what he says. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, in verses 3 through 7. Now, before we read that, I want to remind you of a chart of a doctor, a psychologist put this together, marriage counselor, years and years of working with people who have had trouble in their marriages, and documented this, that there's a process to adultery, and it builds up. The person says that you're going to have several steps to it that leads to it. The emotional readiness of thinking, okay, something's wrong here in our relationship. So, or the growing awareness of someone else. The antennas are out, right? Looking for someone else. Flirtation, frequent communication, intentional meetings, public lingering where others notice, private lingering where feelings are shared, spending private time together. Affectionate, touching, physical contact, passionate, embracing, and then, of course, the affair happening. Nobody does this accidentally, right? There's a process to it. And so if you think about what God is telling us, if we would just be content, we'll avoid these things that lead to this type of behavior. Because everybody is susceptible to this. Nobody's immune from this. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it says, this is the will of God in verse 3, your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual morality, that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. Pause. Like online, right? Is that not what happens online? Is that passion is just stirred up? He says, look, you don't do this in passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God, that no one should take advantage of and defraud his brother in this matter, because the Lord is the avenger of all such, as we also forewarned you and testified. So we have to be people who avoid it. But that takes commitment in marriage, among other things. And then finally, let me say this real quickly, because this is just so awesome. In the book of Hosea, is that another overwhelming message is just how much God loved these people and how much He still loves us, even in the aftermath of all our sin. God's love is great, and that is just so obvious. Now, remember, when you read the book of Hosea, that very first verse mentions the kings of Judah when he was sent, but then it mentions just this one king of Israel, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, who was the second Jeroboam down the road. And he reigned a long time. But when you go back and you can read 2 Kings, and you can read the history of the northern kingdom and southern kingdom and things like that, I'm telling you, you go through that, and it is amazing to me how many times the people departed from God in idolatry or in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. They all continued down that path. But then you have so many cases where God still showed mercy to these people, the northern kingdom especially. And it says right here, He sent Hosea in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash. Well, you go back to 2 Kings 14, and there it is in chapter 14. The Lord saw, verse 26, that the affliction of Israel was very bitter. They were suffering because of their sins. And whether bond or free, there was no helper for Israel. Yet look what it says in verse 27. The Lord did not say that He would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, but He saved them by the hand of Jeroboam the son of Joash. Tremendous. In all their rebellion, He still had pity on them in all their sin. Our God is truly, truly amazing. Because you can take out Israel and you can put your name there. Because we all struggle with sin. And He still loves us. He still wants us back. I'm telling you, some of the most tear-jerking words in all the Bible are found in Hosea. In Hosea chapter 11, notice this in verses 1 through 3, where He says to them, Hosea chapter 11, When Israel, in verse 1, was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son. As they called them, so they went from them. They sacrificed to the Baals and burned incense to carved images. I taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by their arms, but they did not know that I healed them. He goes on to say in verse 7 through verse 9, my people are bent on backsliding from me. Though they call to the Most High, none at all exalt him. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I set you like Zebulun? My heart churns within me. My sympathy is stirred. I will not execute the fierceness of my anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come with terror. You see the conflict that God has? As these people are hurting him in their rebellion and their unfaithfulness, and yet so many times he has to hold back from wiping them out because he said, how can I? How can I get rid of my people that I love so much? And I'm willing to take them back, as he says in chapter 14, in verses 1 through 4. Israel, return to the Lord your God, for you have stumbled because of your iniquity. Take words with you and return to the Lord. Say to him, take away all iniquity, receive us graciously, for we will offer the sacrifices of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses, nor will we say any more to the work of our hands, you are our gods. For in you the fatherless finds mercy. I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned away from him. And there is no reason in the world that cannot be said about you. God still loves us. Still loves us after all our unfaithfulness. But we have to be people who return to him. And so I share these thoughts with you. Hopefully they're encouraging to us in our relationship with him. In marriage, certainly we need to be reminded of that. In being married or preparing for marriage and praying for marriage. But then we have to remember that our sins hurt God. They do, because he loves us so much. And if you're here and not a child of God, we always like to end the service by encouraging you to come back to a God who loves you deeply and is ready to take you back and forgive you of every sin, even the sin of adultery. He will forgive if you turn away and commit it no more. And if you're not a Christian, become a Christian by entering the body of Christ. Or if you have done that, we need to make things right, even in a public way. Come back to God who's ready to take you back as we stand and sing.